A very warm welcome to this inaugural lecture to be given by Professor Anna Meredith. Just talking to Anna, we realise how inaugurals can be a bit different. I always normally on these occasions talk about a big transition point in their lives of the lecturers, in the sense that moving into the professoriate can often be an important marker to the outside world, if nothing else, as well as obviously that internal recognition. Anna tells me this is her third inaugural lecture. So it's not quite that, but nevertheless, I think the move to Kiel, which she made at the beginning of last year, is a very different and an important transition, in particular into the Dean's role that we value from her very greatly. I'm not going to give a big bio description, but I have to say I'm not sure I've seen quite as many letters on the slide as there are up there. But following early degree qualifications from both Oxford and Cambridge and a PhD from Edinburgh, Anna centred herself for most of her time up in Edinburgh, for a part of that time actually in Edinburgh Zoo, and I suspect had a job that many people dreamed about doing, and I suspect we'll hear bits of some of that as we go through. But also established within the vet school in Edinburgh and the Roslin Institute, both of which obviously have world-renowned reputations, putting a big emphasis, I think, on exotic animals, and I think, again, we'll see some of that as it comes through. I'm trying to find a date here, July 2018, Anna took a plunge and went to the University of Melbourne, where she was, again, head of vet school, deputy dean, and unfortunately found herself somewhat stranded, I think, during COVID, which was not exactly the ideal place and probably not part of the plan, and so came back to the UK via the Falklands for a little while, and back to Edinburgh, and as I say, before joining us in January 24. So I'm not going to say any more about that profile, because the important thing is to give Anna the stage to present her inaugural lecture that you can see up there, Wildlife Health Matters, Vets, Conservation, Medicine and One Health. Anna.
Thank you very much, Trevor, for that very kind introduction. And I guess they say, third time lucky. So yes, this is my third inaugural lecture. It's not the same lecture 3 times over, so I have updated it, I'll assure you of that. So it's great to have this opportunity, and thank you so much for turning out tonight. It's great to see so many of you here, and also thank you to those who are watching online. So, as always with inaugural lectures, it's traditional to talk a little bit about how you got here. What did you want to be when you grew up? I really always wanted to be a vet. I was baby boomer. I'm the little girl sitting on the knee there of my big sister Sian. I am the youngest of six kids. Pretty ordinary family. I grew up in Hampshire, Winchester in Hampshire. And 2 great inspirations of my life were had a big influence on me. My parents, my mum, Margot, was a science teacher, passionate scientist, biologist, and really instilled in me that absolute passion for science. So that's where I suppose my career's largely come from. But my dad, Harry, was a musician, so I've also got a very big other strand to my life as part of a very musical family. And I actually did music A-level and got a music scholarship to the sixth form college where I went. But I was animal mad, typical kid, had budgies and gerbils and guinea pigs and rabbits and everything like that. And then I was also a real bookworm. I loved reading, I still do, and I absolutely devoured all the James Herriot books. It seems to be a vetty theme. Those of you who went to Phillips Robinson's inaugural lecture a couple of weeks ago also referred to James Herriot, the Herriot effect. That was me as well, but I was mad about wildlife, and Gerald Durrell was a real inspiration. I loved the Gerald Durrell books and his passion for more exotic species. And actually that mug, you think, why on earth is there a mug there? That's a mug that I still have today, still very much in use. I got that mug when I was 7, and I joined the junior division of the World Wild Fund for Nature, or the World Wildlife Fund as it was then called. It was called the Panda Club. And I used to get newsletters, and I was absolutely passionate about that. And I think that's where my real interest in wildlife and conservation, I was just horrified by the prospect that pandas could potentially go extinct unless we did something about it. So that's where my passion for wildlife came. As Trevor said, I did a first degree at Oxford in physiology, and then I ended up doing what I really should have done right from the beginning, was to go to vet school, and I did that at Cambridge University, and that was me in my graduation year. There were 47 of us, 50% women, 50% men. It's very different now. But it was there again that I really developed my passion for wildlife. And you think, well, look, that picture at the top there, me looking very young. That was at Jersey Zoo. I did a summer school, and I was in my final year as a vet student. And they did a 3-week, very competitive course that I was lucky enough to get a place on, to learn all about conservation. And it was absolutely life-changing for me. And that gentleman there is still alive today, and very larger-than-life character called John Cooper. Some of you might know of him. And he was my mentor for the project that we had to do. And again, he gave me this real inspiration for veterinary science and the impact that veterinary science could have on conservation of biodiversity. And you think, what on earth, that doesn't look very exciting, putting a pigeon in a bag. Well, this was Jersey Zoo, and this is a Mauritian pink pigeon. And at the time of that photograph, there were only 12 Mauritian pink pigeons left in the wild. So obviously that's why we're being very careful, very precious pigeon. I'm happy to say that, due to the work done at places like Jersey Zoo, that population is doing a lot better now. But it was also at vet school that I got my first sort of foray into academia. I was really pleased to spend a summer at Whipsnade Zoo doing a project on cheetah parasites, and spent many a happy hour looking at worms in cheetah fecal samples. And I was really proud. I got an accolade at vet school for being the only student to publish in the vet record as a student. So I suppose that was a sort of a pointer to me going potentially a more academic career. But actually, all I wanted to do really was get qualified and work with wildlife somehow, whether that was in a zoo or with free-ranging wildlife. So I had a very simple career plan. I wanted to graduate it. I wanted to move to Edinburgh because I'd been there on holiday and thought, this is a lovely city. Why don't I try and get my first job here? And I just wanted to be that zoo vet, doing exciting things with things like tigers. So what actually happened, well, the other thing was I did say, and my parents used to remind me of this, I did say, because I'd already done 8 years as an undergraduate by this time, desperate to get out there in the real world, and I said, I will never, ever step inside a university again, and I will never do an exam again, ever. So you can guess how that one worked out. So that's what actually happened. As Trevor said, I did go inside a university, in fact 3 universities, including this one, and that's really been my whole career. I did move to Edinburgh, though, and I did get my first job jabbing tigers. That picture was taken in about 1992, I think. So I was lucky enough to get a job as the zoo vet for Edinburgh Zoo, but that meant being employed by the university as a lecturer in zoo animal and laboratory animal medicine. So I did also have a sort of side career as an important career as a laboratory animal vet. And I did have to take lots more exams, hence all the letters after my name. It was a requirement of becoming specialised in zoo veterinary medicine. And then also I did a PhD, but that was in my 40s with 2 young children. I did that part-time. Later on, after I decided that actually I really did enjoy the research aspects of the role. A trip to Melbourne, that was a bit of adventure. Home via the Falkland Islands, where I got to see penguins in their natural habitat, not just at the zoo, where I'd been dealing with them for many years. And I also worked for the Falkland Island government, which was really interesting, writing their emergency disease plan, contingency plan for the whole country. That was really timely, actually, because I actually decided to include avian influenza and what to do if avian influenza happened. And about 3 months after I left the Falklands, sure enough, they got their first case of avian influenza. So that's how I ended up here, in a nutshell. But what I really loved was being a zoo vet and working with wildlife. I did do the traditional cats and dogs and horses, but that lasted about 9 months, and then I got the job at Edinburgh University. And a zoo vet really is not a specialist at all. It's actually the complete opposite. You have to do everything. And when you turn up at the zoo, I didn't know if I was going to be facing a little poison arrow frog weighing 2 grams or a rhinoceros weighing 2 tons. So that's what I loved about it, just the variety. And it's difficult to find photos because this was a very long time ago, but they don't teach you polar bear medicine at vet school, obviously. And I remember this case very vividly because this was about 3 months into my first ever job. Bear in mind, I'd been graduated about a year as a vet. And they came to me and said, the polar bear's coughing. And I just thought, oh gosh, I don't know what causes coughs in polar bears. And it was all very nerve-wracking. I don't know what to do. And I thought, now come on, Anna, you've been trained really well. Just use your basic principles. So yes, obviously you have to anaesthetize the polar bear first, which you might not have to do if it was a dog. But I could listen to its chest, I could X-ray it, and I even did a lung wash on it, and got the diagnosis of it was a parasitic infection in its lungs. Gave it some drugs, and the polar bear got better. So they obviously had a little bit more confidence in me after that. And likewise, I don't know if you can see at the top right-hand corner of that picture of an anaesthetised polar bear is a little person, and that's me. They don't teach you how to do vasectomies on polar bears, but they do teach you on sheep. So when I found out I had to vasectomise the polar bear, I just went back to my basic principles. And I think I still hold the record for being the first person ever to vasectomise a polar bear. And likewise, surgery, that's what I love about being a vet. You get to be the anaesthetist, you get to be the radiographer, you get to be the surgeon, the medic. It's just basic principles. And doing abdominal surgery on a gorilla, this is a female gorilla, we were doing rectal surgery on this gorilla. You just have to use your basic principles. So it was great fun. At the same time, we developed an exotics clinic, and this was the first sort of dedicated exotic animal and wildlife service at Edinburgh. And this, I just put a sort of medley here. This would be any day's clinics, what would turn up, and we'd be teaching the students. It could be perhaps more traditional exotic pets like rabbits, but anything from tarantulas to fish. This is how you anaesthetise a koi carp. You just put it in water with anaesthetic in it. It's actually quite simple. But, just variety, really, which is the spice of life. And you even get some weird skills, like learning how to become an expert at putting epoxy or fiberglass resin used for car repairs, because that's what you use to repair the shell of a tortoise after you've spayed a tortoise. And we used to have to spay quite a lot of tortoises. And then to stick the shell back together, the best thing to use is sort of epoxy resin. At the same time, we also opened a wildlife hospital and treating lots of British wildlife. We had a seal pool, or we were called out to emergency strandings and things like that, various road traffic accidents. And obviously, I still loved going to the zoo and seeing my animal patients there. At the same time, I was progressing up, obviously, through the academic track, various roles, head of service, and up to sort of associate dean level, but that's a lot less exciting and definitely less photogenic. So that's a little bit about me. I said the title of this lecture was, Wildlife Health Matters. So let's talk about wildlife health matters and also why wildlife health does matter. And I hope by the end of this lecture that I'll have convinced you that it does. So taking a step back, health really connects us all. The health of ourselves as humans, domestic animals, wild animals, plants, and the ecosystem are really closely linked and interdependent. And we're increasingly aware of that. And this concept of what we now call One Health is really gaining traction. It's very well recognised, and it's really just this integrated approach that really aims to balance sustainably and optimise the health of people, animals and ecosystems, recognising the very close interactions, particularly at the interface of where those three parts of this triad converge and touch. And about since the 1990s, although One Health isn't really a new concept, it was introduced really by people like Hippocrates, who recognised that our health was connected to the environment in which we lived. It's really been gaining traction over the last few decades and become quite a unifying concept for a wide range of governmental and non-governmental organisations concerned mainly with human health, but also with animal health. And also, very importantly, and where I come from, is with wildlife conservation and environmental sustainability. And health is important, but it's important to recognise that it's holistic, it's complex, and it's cumulative. And health doesn't mean just absence of disease. It's all about well-being, resilience to change, and obviously it concerns individuals and populations. So when it comes to wildlife, unfortunately, the picture is still not looking good. Species extinctions are still growing exponentially, and we recognise very well these major threats of habitat loss and degradation, overexploitation and farming of species, overfishing, for example, large-scale pollution in many forms, and then particularly invasive species and disease, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. And all this is sort of reinforced by the devastating effects of climate change, which we're all very familiar with. And every year there's the WWF and the Zoological Society of London produce what's known as the Living Planet Index. And when I was preparing for this lecture, this really hit home to me. When I gave my first inaugural lecture in 2012, which is when I first became a professor, the Living Planet Index indicated that wildlife populations had decreased since the 1970s by 58%. And I thought that was pretty horrendous, because that's in my lifetime, we'd lost over half the wildlife in the world, wildlife populations. When I looked it up to prepare for this lecture, that has now increased to a drop of 73%. So although, we are doing a lot of things around the world, and it's very important that we do, we still need to do more because the situation isn't getting better. So 73% average decline in wildlife populations since 1970. That's quite a sobering figure. If you think about it very simply, where there were 100 animals, there are now only 27 in any particular species that are being monitored in this index. And correspondingly, the trends in wildlife health follow that. Obviously, all these interacting factors or drivers are making, generally, wildlife less healthy. So we're going down the way from healthy to unhealthy due to these alterations in our ecosystems, obviously climate change, more opportunities for pathogens to evolve because they're coming in, animals are coming into contact with each other in situations where they perhaps wouldn't before, such as in wildlife markets, or just due to the encroachment of human habitat and human activity. And that's all leading to a lot more emerging infectious disease. So this is where vets come in. Vets are important because we're part of the solution in reversing this trend. And certainly a key to that, I believe, is this increased multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and also transdisciplinary approach using this One Health concept and working together, not just as vets, but working with lots of other disciplines to try and reverse that trend. We're certainly, technology is helping us, advances in our ability to detect and investigate disease. And then lots of things we can do, conservation interventions. And I'm going to talk to you in the second half of the talk about just examples of how I've got involved with conservation interventions. And there are success stories, so it's not all doom and gloom. I'm an eternal optimist. I just think we have to keep on doing more and doing better. And I think certainly there is greater governmental and citizen concern about this. And also we can communicate our science and our work and our findings better. Diseases can spread around the world very quickly, but also we can communicate that and report that and act more quickly as well. So there is hope. So why does wildlife health matter? Well, disease is important. Disease is partly a natural phenomenon. Disease is a natural regulator of populations, and we have what's known as the sort of species arms race between the host, the animal, if you like, and the pathogen, evolving alongside each other. It's a constant arms race, and disease happens. It's part of the natural scheme of things. But when it's influenced and has a major impact you've got the major impact of human activities, that's when we get real problems, and the natural balance really does get upset. So disease is important in wildlife, and that's what I've spent my career being interested in. And I look at it very simply, well, you can look at it very simply. Wildlife can either be a victim of disease, they can be a source of disease, and they can also tell us a lot about the environment by the diseases that they have. If we look for them, they can act as what we call sentinels. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail, explain that. Certainly, wild animals are victims of disease. We know through lots of examples that disease in itself can cause extinctions of species, and it has. And disease is often the last straw. So especially when you've got small, fragmented, threatened populations, if you get a disease coming in, that can be the thing that finishes them off. And that's happened with certain species of frog, for example, with a nasty fungal disease that has spread through frog populations, mainly in South America, but also in Australia. And that's known as it's called chytrid fungus, and you can see it referred to there as this amphibian apocalypse, the most destructive pathogen ever recorded in terms of the devastating effect it's had on populations. And that pathogen was introduced into those countries by human activities. It's not just infectious disease, though. These are dead vultures in India. This was caused by unfortunate use of a very legitimate drug in cattle, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. But unfortunately, where cattle carcasses that had that drug were scavenged by vultures, it causes kidney disease in the vultures and they die. And it drove populations of Indian vultures really to the brink of extinction. And it was only by really intense action and lots of veterinary involvement and educating people about appropriate use, banning the use of that drug, that things have started to pick up a little bit. And this was a picture of fruit bats in Australia through a really hot period where they were just dropping out of the trees, so things like heat stress. So infectious disease, toxins and contaminants, but also just climate change itself can cause really severe problems in wildlife. So they're certainly victims of disease. A few more examples there. Tasmanian devils suffer from a really nasty disease called facial tumour disease. This is an infectious cancer. And again, that's pushing them to the brink of extinction. And these wonderful creatures, which are very endearing, the sea otters, they're really susceptible to a disease called toxoplasmosis. And this is another really good example of how human interventions are exposing wild animals to pathogens that they'd never normally be exposed to. Toxoplasmosis is a cat parasite, basically, found in cat feces. And by people keeping pet cats and flushing litter tray, waste into the sewage systems, that pathogen gets out into the sea and the oceans. So sea otters that would never normally be exposed to that pathogen are now exposed to that pathogen in seawater, and they have no immunity to it and get very sick and can die. Another fungal disease there called white nose syndrome in bats, causing massive die-offs in bats in the USA. And this amazing creature, this is the Saiga antelope. It lives in places like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, very endangered, very threatened. About a decade now, the first case of this, they had this mass die-off. Those little blobs there are just mass die-offs of Saiga antelopes. It was a real mystery. And actually, about 120,000 antelopes died in these die-offs, which is about half the population. You can see that's really significant. And what was, to cut a long story short, well, the cause of this was a natural pathogen that occasionally can cause mild disease in the saigas. They carry it. It's Pasteurella multocida. But this was an example where climate change was having a direct effect, and you can see it says there, triggered by environmental factors. So it's high heat and humidity attributable to climate change had turned a fairly benign pathogen that would only occasionally cause problems into something that was causing fatal and massive die-offs. So there's certainly victims, and we worry about populations and extinctions, but obviously as vets we're also concerned with individual animal welfare. And that is also important, so we mustn't lose sight of that. And you can see just a few examples here of how animals can really suffer, and that's why it's important as well. So a squirrel with squirrel pox dies a horrible death, usually of starvation, because it can't see and can't smell its food. This is a kangaroo in Australia when I was out there. Phalaris is a species of grass that was introduced by the European settlers to feed sheep. But at certain times of year, under certain climatic conditions, it becomes toxic, and they get this horrible sort of neurological disease and blindness. And another example there of mange, sarcoptic mange is a parasite disease. At the top there's a koala, and at the bottom there a wombat. So it's really suffering severe chronic disease. Horrible. And again, this was never found in Australia, but was introduced probably with dogs by the European settlers. So victim, they're definitely a victim of disease, and that's a really important thing to bear in mind. But then people often are more concerned with wildlife health because of wildlife as a source of disease or reservoir of disease. And there are lots of diseases that we can attribute to wildlife, and that influence seems to be increasing. You can see some of the examples there, including COVID, that we're pretty certain came from wildlife. Live animal markets, mixing of animal species together, giving them that opportunity for pathogens to jump, where in natural conditions that opportunity would never happen. Also things like intensive wildlife farming and wildlife hunting. We've got lots of examples there of how that is a very real problem. About 75% of all the emerging infectious diseases are actually what we call zoonotic. They can spread from animals to humans, and those are mainly from wildlife. I'd add another one there. This was taken from a research paper, but the other source of obviously zoonotic diseases from domestic animals. There are diseases that we can catch from domestic animals, but actually if you look at the sort of epidemiology of most of these diseases, often the primary source is also wildlife. So it's really important that we know about wildlife health and epidemiology, because it has a direct impact on human populations and human health. And it really is true. People often blame bats, all these horrible diseases like Ebola and COVID and things coming ultimately from bats. And they really do harbour more dangerous viruses than other species. But it's not the bat's fault. That's my argument. It's not the bat's fault. It's only because of human activities and encroaching on the bat's habitat and giving them opportunities to spread disease into things like domestic animals that we get these situations where pathogens can jump. So rather than focusing on all the horrible diseases that bats can get, I think we need to focus on more of what we can do to prevent or mitigate disease transmission at the human-animal interface. And luckily that is being thought about more these days. They can also be source and victim. This was a case of a possum. Again, this was a project I was involved with in Australia, a disease called Buruli ulcer. Big problem in humans, and people worry about that because it's humans, and it's emerging in Victoria. You can see the news there. It's spread by mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes bite people, and you get a horrible sort of big, deep ulcer that's sort of non-healing. It's a bacteria that causes that disease. But we now know from studying the possums that possums are a reservoir. We find the bacteria in the possum feces. So that's important because they're the source of the disease. But also they're a victim of the disease. They suffer these horrible ulcers themselves. So it's a real welfare issue. And I was involved with this massive project I was concerned about the possums. Obviously there was a huge amount on this particular project, and it's still ongoing, looking at the mosquitoes and the human aspect of this. But it's important to understand the whole picture. And Ebola, I heard about Ebola. There was another outbreak in the news today. Ebola is still there, horrible disease, very, very serious problem in humans. And there is a wildlife cycle. Again, it's bats are the primary source of Ebola. It's usually circulating in bat populations, not causing a problem for the bats, but occasionally you get spillover into other species, including primates, and obviously that can spill over into people as well, which is obviously a fatal disease often in people. But victim, Ebola actually has wiped out a third of the world's great apes. They're already suffering, populations are suffering, gorilla, chimpanzee populations, so it's very significant. And then finally, I mentioned sentinels. Sentinels is a really interesting concept and was something I did my PhD on, the so-called canary in the coal mine. And we can use animals to tell us about the environment and what nasty things might be out there, or things that we should be worried about or concerned about, either because they get the disease themselves or they die from the toxin, like the canaries with the gas in the mines, and they can show us that something's there. And this is a very real use of wildlife, and why it's important that we study wildlife and are interested and know about their diseases. This is a dead crow. You think, so what? Well, actually, in the United States, a disease called West Nile virus emerged about a decade or more ago now. And actually, it was vets in the Bronx Zoo in New York that noticed these dead crows around and actually did the pathology and were the first to actually say, this is actually West Nile virus, this is serious, because West Nile virus can and did kill people. They tell us about the environment either by accumulating over in the same individual over time. The same individuals, as they grow, pick up more and more of often things like a toxin or a contaminant that we're looking at, might be mercury in the oceans or whatever you're interested in, or up the food chain, and we call that bioaccumulation or biomagnification. But we can also apply this to disease exposure at a population level as well. And this is what I did as a sort of proof of concept for my PhD. Basically, it's the same principle that if you have a disease in a large population of prey animals, but at low levels, perhaps only 1% of those, say, rodents, if you look at prey, something like rodents, 1% of them have a disease. The predators and scavengers that eat those animals up the food chain, because they live longer and they're eating lots of them, they're effectively sampling that population for you. So if you want to detect whether a disease is there or not, you can either go out and sample about 300 rodents to have a chance of detecting it, or you could go out and sample 6 foxes. So it's a lot more cost effective. So it's a really nice concept. And effectively, that's what I spent 4.5 years doing as a part-time PhD, was going out and trapping lots of rodents and also sampling foxes and cats that hunt to see if that actually did work in practice in the UK. I was sampling wild rodents over 3 years in various study sites around the UK, and also the things that ate them. So that was foxes and cats that hunted, and looked at the antibody levels to 3 selected pathogens. You can see the names there. They're all zoonotic. They can all cause disease in people as well, and in domestic animals. And we were able to prove that, very statistically significant, that the seroprevalence in the predators was much higher than in the prey. But also, very importantly, it was about up to 400 times cheaper and more cost-effective to sample the predators and the prey. So that's 4 years of work in one slide. How about that? So that's what conservation's all about, conservation medicine's all about. Wildlife health in practice, it's really doing all those things, looking at that baseline information, what's out there, finding out more about the health of populations, doing that research and discovery, doing routine surveillance for many things, and then also being involved in interventions, and that's where vets come involved. So conservation medicine, people often ask me, what does conservation medicine mean? Do you have to be a vet to do conservation medicine? Well, vets do that and can do that, but it also involves lots of other disciplines as well. And to me, conservation medicine is all about putting that One Health into practice. It's One Health, wildlife health in practice, or the practice of One Health. It's very multidisciplinary and very collaborative, and that's why it's so fantastic. So it really sits at that interface of that, remember that triad I showed you at the beginning of humans, animals, and the environment. That's where conservation medicine sits. So that's the sort of background to what I'm going to now hopefully illustrate to you with some of my work to illustrate how vets do get involved, but very much as part of multidisciplinary collaborative teams. So I'm going to use a few examples, starting back with the tale of Squirrel Nutkin, the squirrel tale. A lot of my career has been working with red squirrels. I'm sure you all know that the British red squirrel is highly endangered. The picture on the left was in about the 1940s, and red on the map is where red squirrels were, and grey is where grey squirrels are. And you can see that over 50 or 60 years or so, the grey squirrels have just driven the red squirrels out, and they've retreated. We do have, basically, the main population now is in Scotland. There are also some in Northern Ireland. They were reintroduced there. And we have some remnant populations elsewhere in the country, such as on the Isle of Wight, Anglesey, and a few other places. And it's all to do with the invasive species, the grey squirrel. Now, I know we've got lots of lovely grey squirrels around the campus and everybody loves them. When I see a grey squirrel, I sort of have to wince a bit, and you know, because I see them in a very different light in terms of the damage they do to red squirrel populations. They are actually in the list of the 100 world's worst invasive alien species, grey squirrels. So that's a human activity. We introduced grey squirrels to the UK. It's not the grey squirrels' fault, but they brought a nasty disease with them called squirrel pox. It doesn't affect them, but it kills the red squirrels. So it's not just that they compete with red squirrels, they're bigger, they compete with them for habitat, which is also decreasing, but they also wipe them out due to disease. So for a long time, all my career in Edinburgh, we were doing routine red squirrel surveillance. We invited wildlife rangers and members of the public to send us dead red squirrels in the post. It was a very routine thing. Every week I would get parcels of dead red squirrels. Very good system, worked really well. But through that, we were just able to do routine surveillance for years and years and years and just collect all that baseline data. But it's really important to do that. Because we find all sorts of other things and we can monitor what's going on in that population. I put this picture in because it makes me chuckle. It just shows what working in the field is like in Scotland. You need two things to work with red squirrels in the field. This is a great field anaesthetic kit, so I'm anaesthetising the squirrel and then releasing it. It was fine just to sample it. This wasn't a dead red squirrel, but you can tell it's Scotland because I've got a midge net on. And those of you who've been to Scotland know what I mean. You also need a Coke bottle, which you modify to make an anaesthetic chamber. But the routine findings and the epidemiology of what's going on in our red squirrel population is really important, doing the science. And it was through that surveillance that we were able to detect, unfortunately, it wasn't a nice thing to be the first to detect the first presence of squirrel pox in Scotland as it came steadily north up through England, and sure enough, as we predicted, into Scotland. It was first detected in the grey squirrels in about 2005, and then we picked up the first case 2 years later in 2007. So that routine surveillance is really important, and we can monitor that, and lots of conservation measures are now being taken to try and prevent the spread of squirrel pox through grey squirrel control, prevent it going further north, and protecting the remaining remnant population of red squirrels. But also, doing that routine surveillance, we were able to find lots of things that had never been discovered before. We found new viral infections that had never been described in squirrels and seemed to be unique to them. This rather gory picture here is a bit of squirrel gut that's got what we call an intersusception. It sort of kaleidoscopes in on each or in on itself, and obviously it's a fatal condition, but that was caused by a viral infection. So it's really important to do that baseline surveillance and monitoring, because they are effectively, again, acting as sentinels of what's going on. And then this really interesting case, this was 2006, we were presented with this weird-looking squirrel here that had these lesions that I'd never seen before. I hope no one's squeamish, by the way. There's nothing too gory here. I'm so used to talking to vets that I never worry about pictures like this, but you can see it's got horrible swellings on its ears and its nose, and it was really thin, and we'd never seen anything like that before. And to cut a long story short, over the next 6 years or so, we had 6 cases of these. So it wasn't very common. It was really sporadic. But there was a definite pattern here. You can see some more examples here. You can tell that that's not normal. Big, swollen, shiny ears. They usually have lovely furry ears with tufts on. A big, swollen nose. And then we got pictures of them in the wild, live. This was a squirrel that a member of the public photographed for many years on his garden feeder, just getting worse and worse. So it was very slowly progressing. It eventually died, and he submitted to us. We were able to use that as part of our study as well and find out what this disease was. And to cut a long story short, we did all the science. We did all the bacteriology and the PCRs and stuff. And we got a really unexpected new finding. And this actually turned out to be leprosy, which was just absolutely not what we were expecting. Leprosy really is a human disease and has never been described in animals in the UK. We do know a little bit about it. It does. At that time, we only thought that armadillos were the only other animal that was susceptible to leprosy. So it was a really big thing at the time, and it has gone on to lead to lots of other new questions that we're asking. And once we knew it was leprosy and started getting these pictures, and there was lots of publicity and BBC and everything like that, and people started sending me hundreds and hundreds of pictures of this. So once you knew what to look for, you can actually just see by looking at them that all these squirrels are suffering from leprosy. You can see they've got bald, swollen ears and bulbous noses. So we were able to just monitor this disease. And they could live with it for a while, but eventually they did seem to succumb. And then I got an email, I think it was, from somebody living on Brownsea Island in 2015, and he sent me this picture as an attachment, and I just took one look at it and I said, that's leprosy. So there is a small population of red squirrels on Brownsea Island down in Dorset. So we included that as a study site. I had a PhD student, and we studied these squirrels in Scotland and on Brownsea Island through that PhD for three years or so. But the interesting thing was that it turned out when we went to visit them, they had records that the rangers had kept going back to the 1970s of these squirrels with these lesions. So this wasn't a new thing. This had been going on for some time, but no one had ever done the science, found out what it was, and it was quite sporadic. And the good old rangers there, it's run by the National Trust, Brownsea Island, and they collected all the carcasses over time in the freezer. So we were given 25 carcasses, and we looked at them, and some of them had nasty signs of leprosy. Some of them didn't and looked completely normal, but we tested them and they were all 100% positive. And this was a slightly different version of the leprosy bacillus. This was Mycobacterium leprae. The other one in Scotland was lepromatosis. Both of them are causes of human leprosy. And this we published in 2016 in Science. So it was really interesting. I was worried about the squirrels. Obviously, it's really interesting. But obviously, this has human disease implications as well. Because leprosy, you think it was disease of the past. You sort of associate leprosy with medieval England and leper colonies and that sort of thing. But actually, it's what we call one of the neglected tropical diseases. There's over 250,000 cases of leprosy still in the world every year, and we can't really explain that because it is very treatable. So why is there still this prevalence of leprosy in people around the world when treatment is actually very effective? So this work was important, from red squirrels in Scotland, which was very unexpected, to the implications for human disease as well. As I said, we mentioned the armadillos. There was an outbreak, and there have been since a few more outbreaks in Florida. People who are going and killing armadillos and handling armadillos. There were some cases of leprosy. So there is obviously a potential zoonotic link here. And very recently, chimpanzees in the Ivory Coast, this is from a couple of years ago, we've now found that they have been detected with leprosy for the first time. And we think this is actually spread from humans to animals. So it was a really interesting story, and without going into too much detail, when we do the sort of family trees of the leprosy bugs, and compare them to the human leprosy bugs. They're very, very closely related. And from that, we've been able to work out that actually we now know that leprosy bacteria are capable of infecting at least 3 hosts, so people, armadillos, and red squirrels. And so far, that's the only 3 species we've still ever found it in, even though people are now going out and looking for other possible rodent reservoirs. And actually, the most plausible explanation of why the squirrels have got leprosy is actually they caught it from people, because the medieval skeleton that was had leprosy that we got a sample of from Winchester, actually, which was odd because that's where I was born and brought up, is really closely related to the squirrel one. So it seems that that was the most likely direction of travel. And we shouldn't be surprised if you look back. We used to keep red squirrels as pets and hunt them for fur and eat them as well. So very close human-animal contact, giving that opportunity for disease spread. So you'll be pleased to know, though, obviously when this all came out in the sort of 2016, 2017, Public Health England got a bit aerated because people were worried, oh my goodness, am I going to catch leprosy from red squirrels? Don't worry, there's never been a case in the UK. It's very difficult to catch leprosy, but we had to do a risk assessment. So that's sort of a good example of victim and potential source of disease. The next one is I want to talk a bit about interventions and how vets get involved in interventions for conservation and improving wildlife health. I've been involved for many years with Scottish wildcats. And I put this up because I think that long list, doesn't mean you don't need to know what's on that list, but basically that's all the organisations involved in one conservation project. And that really is important because, as I said at the beginning, this is interdisciplinary. And vets there, we were there as the Royal Dick School of Veterinary Studies, but just one part of a huge big team, and that's what it takes to save a species. Many inputs, many stakeholders, and the veterinary aspect is really just a small part of a very big picture. But it's great fun to do and really important work. So the work I was mainly directly involved in before I left for Australia was going out and we didn't know how many wildcats were there in Scotland. Were there any wildcats left, and are they pure? So it involved camera trapping, putting out traps. Again, the vets are important because we need to go in and anaesthetise the cats and sample them, take genetic samples, very precious animals. Sorry, it seems to have gone on to timer. Again, out in the rain, under an umbrella. This is what working in Scotland's like. But to cut a long story short, all that work really led us to the conclusion that there are unfortunately no pure wildcats left in Scotland. They've all hybridised with domestic cats. And that has led to the second part of the project now, which is actually breeding wildcats in captivity and releasing them to the wild, which is now starting to be successful. We're on our 3rd season of releasing captive-bred wildcats back into the wild. But again, just the important role of vets in working that out, taking those samples, working with the teams that do the genetic work, but also as part of that routine work, I was interested in looking at the diseases of wildcats and looking at the sort of epidemiology of diseases. We found important cat viruses in wildcats that had never been reported before, things like FIV, feline immunodeficiency virus. But that's really important, and we can monitor that, and it's all feeding into the bigger picture of why we all need to think about things like responsible cat ownership and preventing inbreeding. So that's now led to, obviously, the reintroduction of the wildcat. We've also involved in reintroduction of beavers. That was the first proper trial in Scotland. And again, veterinary intervention and veterinary input is really important in terms of monitoring disease. Beavers were introduced from Norway, and they needed to make sure that we needed to make sure they were healthy and not bringing diseases into Scotland, but also that they weren't being exposed to diseases in their new home that they were perhaps not immune to. So again, I don't know if you can read that, but we called it, it's a One Health monitoring system. And if you ever wondered where to take a blood sample from a beaver, it's on that lovely tail. So again, just an example about how vets are a really important part of these teams. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about in the last 5 minutes or so is the most recent project, which is still ongoing about eagles, because there's just some great pictures here, and I can share that with you. Golden eagles. This was, again, an intervention and part of a huge effort that's taken, we're in our 6th year now, of conservation interventions, and in this case, translocating eagles to restore the population and restore the health of the population. So just a bit of background. Golden eagles only really exist now in Scotland. They've been hunted by persecution, hunted to extinction in England. They were really on the brink of extinction also in Scotland until they were given legal protection in about the 1950s. And since then, they've clung on, and they're doing reasonably well in northern Scotland. There's about 500 pairs. But in the south of Scotland, which is actually where I live, there are only 3 pairs, and we couldn't really understand why the population wasn't doing well in the south of Scotland. So a lot of science was done by a lot of very clever people over many, many years. The picture on the bottom left there is satellite tagging data of golden eagles, and you can see there's this really clear divide of the 500 pair population where that is, and then a big white gap, and then the satellite tags of the population in southern Scotland, and there's no crossover between them. So basically, for some reason, the eagles weren't spreading and reinforcing naturally the southern Scotland population. So that population was small, as I said, only about 3 pairs of birds, not sustainable, very isolated, and also at risk of genetic problems because they weren't getting any new fresh blood in. So a lot of science and a lot of studies went on, and the first thing to do, you can't just say, well, let's just chuck some more golden eagles down there and move them in. You have to do the science first. Big surveys were done, looking at the reasons for the historical decline and checking that they weren't still there, so that was mainly persecution. It hasn't completely disappeared, but it was mainly gamekeepers, etc., shooting golden eagles. Looking at the history, were there ever many eagles in southern Scotland? Well, yes, historically they were. You look at all the place names associated with eagles, it's fascinating. But basically, all this ended up in looking at the habitat. We worked out, or the scientists worked out, that the area could support about 16 pairs of eagles now. So it was feasible to consider a translocation, and that's what we've done. So if you're wondering how that works, basically, and again, this is where the vets get involved, is we're involved with every single chick translocation because we're concerned for their welfare and their health. We go to the nests, I don't climb the cliffs, but lots of very clever people climb the cliffs and the trees, and basically take 1 of 2 chicks. So we only select nests with twins. We select the healthiest twins, so we examine both birds, weigh and measure them, give them a health check, and select one, and take that to be translocated down to South Scotland. The great thing about this is it's actually very rare for any natural nest to raise 2 birds, to raise twins. Usually one bird kills the other. That's a natural phenomenon with birds of prey. So actually, by taking one away, you actually maximise the chance of both chicks surviving. Obviously, this is all done under licence and very careful regulations. So there's myself and my PhD student, Gabby, there doing the fun. So typical, she's doing the fun stuff, sampling the eagle. I'm there writing all the records in the notebook. And then basically, it's very simple. You put them in a van, and we want to get them from the nest, where we've taken them at about 5 or 6 weeks of age, just before they fledge, but they're big enough to be able to be fairly robust, and move them down to the south of Scotland. Sometimes that involves a ferry journey, so it can take quite a long time, but usually that process we can get there in about 8 hours, and we take them to secret locations that I'm not allowed to tell you about in south of Scotland, where we've built aviaries. Very quiet, and nobody really knows about them, and obviously where there's appropriate habitat. They're paired up, so with another eagle, because that mimics the nest situation, and even though they're unrelated, they usually get on very well. And then they have no visible contact with humans at all. We don't want these birds to get used to humans at all. So once they're in that aviary, they're just fed through a hatch at the back, they're monitored remotely, and they are just left peace and quiet, obviously fed on natural type food, and they're there till they're about 12 weeks of age. They get bigger. I'm hoping I'll show you. They start learning how to fly. So this is one of the birds just getting its wing muscles ready to fly. And then at about 12 weeks, we can release them. So this video takes a couple of minutes, but it's so rare to see this. I thought I'd share it with you. So we're filming this from about 500 meters away, very calm. This is them, they're about 12 weeks of age. You can see at this stage, they've had their last health check. They've been monitored throughout. So they have a health check when they arrive. They have a final health check before they go. They're also fitted with rings and a satellite tag. So as you see these birds moving, you'll notice the satellite tag, so we can monitor them after they're released. And it's all just very quiet and calm, filming from, let's say, about half a kilometre away. No humans in sight, and they just take their time. Some of them come straight out. These particular pair take a bit longer to get out. Very quiet release site in a valley where we know there's prey for them, and we supplementary feed them on platforms. They learn to fly better, they learn their hunting skills, and they learn to hunt themselves. They don't need parents to do that. And we keep them fed with supplementary feeding throughout the end of that year. So this is usually sort of late summer, autumn time, and they will start to explore the area and go further and further afield, but they'll always know that they've got food to come back to, particularly in the harsh winter. And it's amazing how quickly they learn to hunt and fend for themselves. So you can see the satellite tag aerial on the back there, thinking about it. And this one, I think the first one plops onto the ground and goes, and the second one is thinking about it also. Are they going to go? Yes, they are. But what a treat to be involved in that, and it's absolutely amazing. And I have to stress the absolute professionalism and hard work and dedication of the team that do this. As I said, the vets are just some very small part of it. We get to come in and do some fun handling and sampling, but day in, day out, and over 6 years, the team do this work and look after them and monitor them. There they go, off they go. So if you're interested in that, there's a website, fantastic website that, if you want to watch the whole thing, the whole process, you can go and look at that. So I'm happy to share that. So that's just the feeding platform there. And then we monitor them. So we can see where they go. This is the whole of southern Scotland. And it takes about 3 years before they settle on a territory and establish, and we can monitor them, check that they're doing okay, etc. And that's just one bird. Obviously, we have multiple birds over many years. In 2022, we also did some, it was a bit of an experiment at the time. Rather than taking the chicks, which is obviously a lot of very labour intensive, takes about 6 weeks of them in captivity and all that work and rearing them, but actually we tried going and getting sub-adults and translocating them under a research licence again, obviously. So these are older birds, older than 4 months of old, up to about 3 years old. And you think, how on earth do you catch golden eagle in the Outer Hebrides? Well, there are experts that do that, and it's quite amazing to watch. Basically, you put a deer carcass down, you put a net next to it that fires from a gun and goes over the eagle, and when the eagle comes down onto the carcass, you fire the net, it goes over them and traps them, and then you run in and catch your eagle, and it's amazing to watch. It's very humane, very quick, and very effective. So there you've caught your eagle. But again, really important that we do the science on these, take all the samples, check they're healthy, check for things like bird flu, etc. Here's the two main people involved in this project, Kat and John, do all the hard work. This is my colleague Gidona, one of the other vets on the team, sampling the bird. And this is much easier because we can just literally catch the bird, bring it down to southern Scotland and release it. And that's worked quite well. We've done 15 sub-adults now, and some of them have gone back to their home. How they know how to get back to the Outer Hebrides, who only knows. But about 7 have stayed in south of Scotland and settled on territory, and actually one is now paired up and attempting to breed. So it is a viable technique and obviously logistically easier and cheaper. And it's been a huge success, so what a privilege for me as a vet to be involved in that. The survival rate of the chicks is about 83%, which is way higher than in a natural situation, and all of the subadults are still alive today. Going back to the science briefly, again, just really underpinning how important it is to find out more about these amazing birds and increase our scientific knowledge. So alongside that, we've done the genome sequence of the eagle, which has never been done before. All the science about that, establishing baseline information is really, really important. And now I'm proud to say that I've been a part of a very small part of a massive team that's established a population of around 50 golden eagles in southern Scotland. They're now on territories, they're pairing up, they're starting to breed, we've got chicks now. But it's all part of a bigger picture that's a genuine partnership. And the key to the success of this project is getting the general public and all the landholders really involved and dedicated to this. And support for the golden eagle, so they're not persecuted anymore. And actually, the situation has completely changed in that land and estate managers are now really proud to have golden eagles on their land. And Moffat is now known as Scotland's first eagle town. We have the Moffat Eagle Festival every year. It's become a really big community thing that everyone's proud. It's bringing business, it's bringing tourism. It's a fantastic win-win success. But again, massive huge team and community effort, of which vets are important, but small part. So I hope I have convinced you that vets are important. I hope I've convinced you that wildlife health is important and the world needs vets, but very much as part of interdisciplinary teams. We have unique scientific training, and I'm really proud that One Health and this whole concept is really embedded at the vet school here, in the syllabus and the curriculum at the Harperkill Vet School. And I'm really looking forward to working more with the team there and progressing that ethos here. All towards a more sustainable future, going back to that picture there of the triad of ecosystems, animals and human health, but really making sure that we're all aware that it involves multiple sectors, multiple disciplines, and that whole communication, collaboration, and capacity building, and very much the input of society. So, final word, going back to Gerald Durrell, I thought this was a good note to end on. I'll let you read that quote from William Beebe, who was a very famous naturalist, and this is on Gerald Durrell's memorial plaque in Jersey Zoo, where I started my career, talking about how important it is to save species, because when the last individual of a race of living beings breathes no more, another heaven and another earth must pass before such a one can be again, and obviously we don't want that to happen. So thank you very much for listening, and I have so many people to thank. I can't possibly mention them all, but all the mentors, colleagues, collaborators, friends over the year, and of course my family. So thank you very much.